the trouble to come along and support this recommendation, and I'd love them to just come along and sit alongside me, with your permission, Chairman. I'll say a few words, and I'm sure that Mr. Cooling, who is the Chairman of Teeston Parish Council, he may like to say a few words as well. Please bear with me.
Okay, welcome, Peter. Thank you. To the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. We certainly don't want to take up members' time, but what we do want to do is to reflect the feeling of both our parishes, I think. It's always been a puzzle to me why Barming has only ever been Barming. It's never been Barming and Teeston, because the people of Teeston have their own electoral list, they have their own electoral prefix, but they're just not recognised. They have their own parish council, their own village hall. Parish clerk is qualified, by the way. Barming's isn't. I don't know if that's significant. But the trouble is with Barming, it tends to blur with Fant and Heath. But because we have the name of Barming Ward and Barming Parish, it's pretty easy to say that we're from Barming. Whereas Teeston Parish Council, they have become stronger and more active over the years as the landscape of local government has changed over the years. And I do think they've earned the right. They are a very strong community who love their own village, their own area very, very much. And I think they've earned the right to have their title in with the name of Barming. It's a real cohesive community, and I certainly would like to see it reflected. I know that all the residents would as well. And dare I say that I do feel reasonably confident that it would be worth spending the £1,000, because I appreciate that's what it's going to cost. It's going to cost us £1,000, but I think it will be well invested, and I'm sure that residents would very much appreciate it, and I do feel confident about it. But please let my colleague, the Chairman of Teeston Parish Council, just have a word or two.
May I?
Indeed you may.
Thank you very much, and sorry to take your time this evening. Faye, thank you for what you've said, and I'd like to thank the officer for putting the report together, and I'm sorry about the £1,000. I could actually say, and do excuse this, if Maidstone Borough gave the parishes some more money, we'd be prepared to pay it, but I didn't say that really. So.
You see what I mean about Teeston being active in local matters.
But please, it's not that we don't like Barming, it's nothing like that, but we would like to see the recognition in the title of the ward. So apologies for the trouble it's putting you to. I'm hoping you'll support the officer's recommendation, and I'd like to say thank you very much to our ward councillor. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And can I have Councillor Perry signalled first, and then Councillor Vizard? Thank you. I'm actually jumping the gun here, apparently. Angela hasn't spoken on this one yet.
Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So as you've already heard, we received a request from Councillor Gooch to change the name of Barming Ward to Barming and Teeston to reflect the wishes of residents. The legal process for changing a ward name is set out in the report, and it falls under Section 59 of the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act, as well as that the timetable is also set out at 6.1, which outlines the steps to be taken. Other councils have also been through this process, so it's not a complicated process, but we do have a duty to consult everyone, and the formal decision would be taken by council. So you can see the timetable we're proposing, and the cost of the survey will be just over £1,000 if you look at the return, and then it'll be processed by officers and brought back. But I'm happy to take questions. But I think Councillor Gooch explained quite well why it's been put forward.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you. I'd just like to say I've worked with Councillor Cooling over a number of years, and Teeston are a major contributor to Calc, a very important parish. As is Barming as well, but Teeston is very important. They do a lot of hard work, actually, and I strongly support this, and I would like to propose we agree to the officer's recommendation, I'd like to make a formal proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Vizard, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Perry has just said, I've got no problems in pushing this forward, and I would step in and I would second it, and if it's not a problem. But I must declare an interest because I am a parish councillor for Barming Parish.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually support this, but not necessarily for the reasons that have been said so far, because I don't think that the name of the ward should be determined on how strong or active a parish council is necessarily, because otherwise poor Patrick's ward would end up being some sort of unpronounceable name, assuming all the parishes are doing their job there. So, but I actually support it just because it's a sensible thing to do, because Teeston it represents quite a large number of the electorates in there, and it just sort of it makes a lot of sense, really, not much more than that. Just a quick question on the timetable going forward. Obviously, we put a consultation out now, and if you could sort of go into more detail, basically, about what's in paragraph 6 of the report in front of us. How long is the consultation going to be? Is this to every single resident in the ward? I assume the resolution, when it comes back on the 15th of November to this committee, is to adopt what the consultation says, and obviously for the council to ratify that decision. And then, am I correct in thinking that the name changes as of the 1st of December, not as of the next time that this particular electoral ward is up for election?
Yeah, sorry. You kind of answered your own question, but I will go with it. So yes, you're right. The consultations to every household in the ward. So it's the ward that's directly affected, and I think that's 1,035 households, so they will all be consulted. It runs from the 1st of October to the end of October, so it's a fairly succinct time period. And we'll publish it in a variety of places as well to make sure people are aware it's happening and not just rely on it going through their letterbox. And I'm sure the parish councils will have a role to play in that in terms of publicising and helping promote it. You're right, it'll then come back to the Democracy Committee for decision before it goes on to full council, if appropriate, because if it comes back that actually residents don't want it, you may well decide, therefore, not to make a recommendation to council. And yes, it will be from the date of the revised register. So from that point forward, it will be known as Barming and Teeston, and when we next go out to election, that's what will be published, and everyone will be made aware.
Councillor Ring, you...
Yeah, thank you. As you would expect, I would come in on this bit here. I've got no qualms about this going forward, none at all, because, you know, I know how hard you all work, and if it's better, then that's fine. But I do hate when I see neither of which with a parish, an estate that runs all the way up. Please don't make it sound as if it's exclusive and these people don't matter, because that would that would really go against my grain as a councillor for what I stand for. So it'd just be nicer if it was explained a bit better.
At this point, can I call Councillor Gooch again to just clarify her views?
Thank you, Chairman. You've made such a good point, and I didn't want to prolong this more than necessary. I produce a local newsletter for Barming Parish Council, and we go to a lot of trouble to send that newsletter beyond that silly boundary that runs right up the middle of the Beverley estate, because it would be divisive. So we make sure that we deliver our newsletter just up to Hermitage Lane and just this side of Tunbridge Road, so that we are including everybody. But I have to say, this could be an issue for the Boundary Commission when we come to the logistics of changing boundaries, and mindful of all the house building that's going on, I suspect that we'll need to wait a couple of years for communities to settle down. But I think you've made a very, very valid point, absolutely. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. a good point there. Councillor Borton.
Well, Councillor Gooch raised the point as soon as I put my hand up. I don't think we need to. I agree about the city boundary in Barming. I'm sure Councillor Vizard gets the same issues that I do with the boundaries of Fountain Heath and Barming, or slightly all over the place. But I don't think we need to wait for 2 years to address this. You're right. I think it's local government boundary commission which deals with parish boundaries. So therefore, could we perhaps put a separate resolution on the papers while we're at it, that we perhaps request the local government boundary commission to do some investigatory work into perhaps looking at a new boundary or an extended Barming parish or a new boundary, but in that part of Maidstone, because I think there might be a bit of support for that. Potentially.
Mrs Woodhouse.
Yeah, sorry if I look a bit panicked by that idea. First thing, if it's a parish review, like reviewing a parish boundary, that's actually carried out by the district council, and it's a community governance review. So we would carry that out, and the district council, and that could be a proposition from a ward member, but that's specifically on parishes. If it's a ward boundary you want to look at, I have to say, when I put the request out to councillors to say, have any of you got name changes, I actually had a couple who were really about changing the boundary and about, actually, our population is growing, we don't feel this reflects it. So I think it'll be wider than Barming. So if you were going to put anything forward, I think it's probably just an update on when we're likely to get a boundary review and what will be covered, if that's or something of that nature.
Yes, but as we see in other parts of the borough, the parish boundary and the ward boundary are not necessarily coterminous. So, therefore, I would not, because this committee has looked in the past at potentially doing reviews of the ward boundaries, and that's been kicked out, but perhaps we could have a look at the parish boundary for Barming, which would then influence the ward boundaries whenever the next ward boundary review is. It doesn't mean that the ward and parish boundaries have to be changed at the same time. So therefore, if this council does wish to, I would support personally a community governance review into the Barming parish boundary, personally speaking, in that case. But I think we should try and keep parish and ward boundary reviews quite different, because as we see in Detlin and Bairstow and Boxley area in particular, they're not necessarily all the same.
I completely agree. They are different, and it'd be neat if we could make them, but they're not. We do have issues where we have parishes crossing over ward boundaries, etc. The issue is if you look at one in isolation, there may be other implications, but I'm certainly happy to take it away and bring something back to the committee. But if you want to make it specific, we'll do it specifically on Barming.
Alternatively then, bearing in mind what you've just said, and going back to the last agenda item, perhaps, in terms of the work programme going forward, is it then appropriate for us to perhaps add an item which is basically a community governance review into parish boundaries? Full stop. Perhaps to look at some of these oddities that we get in the area. I don't know. That's an idea.
What are the views of other members on that? Sorry, does anybody else want to comment on Councillor Borton's suggestions there? Okay. Councillor Fissenden.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to come in and say that I did actually second what John Perry did say, and I didn't want it to kind of be swept under the carpet and get overlooked. So we can just get the vote done on that first, please. Thank you, sorry.
No, it wasn't swept under the carpet, but I thought it would be good to let other members actually have I hadn't forgotten it, have their view, and it does appear that we may have to make a slight adjustment to the recommendation as a result of... Yep. Yeah, we just had an amendment to it, item 2, which is to undertake a community, community government review into parish boundaries. That's the second item, which combined with the first one. Okay. So could I have a proposer for that? Councillor Borton, and seconder, I think, was Councillor Fissenden. Can we go for a vote, please, on this? Those for? We'll call that unanimous. Sorry about that. Oops. We also need to take a vote on the first part of this recommendation, which is to agree to a consultation exercise for changing the name of Barming Ward to become Barming and Teeston Ward. So can we have a show of hands on that?
Just to confirm, it was proposed by Councillor Perry, wasn't it? And it was seconded by Councillor Fissenden.
Okay. Hang on. No, it isn't unanimous. Councillor Vizard. Yeah, it is, yeah. Thank you. It is now unanimous. Thank you very much. Councillor Cox.
Now that's over, I'm amazed that Brian didn't think that it rolls off the tongue possibly better as Teeston and Barming. I'm not sure. Is that Bias Gonzalez? But I'll leave that one exactly where it is now we voted.
Thank you for waiting till the close of the item.
I suspect you're a bit late on that one. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right, we're now move on to the review of outside bodies, which is on page 14 of your agenda. I trust everybody has read your agenda. Yes, on page 14. It's item 12.
It starts
Oh,
on
sorry. Yeah. All right, sorry. Yep. There you go. But yes, page 12. I presume everybody has read their agenda.
Okay, members, the report before you sets out the results of a culmination of work to re-examine all the outside bodies that councillors are appointed to. The Outside Bodies Working Group met on the 24th of July to consider all the current outside bodies and made suggested recommendations as set out in Appendix A to this report. The chairs and vice chairs of the committees mentioned in the appendix have been consulted, and I will give you their feedback as we get to those outside bodies. I'm happy to go through the recommendations within the appendix one by one, or just discuss the ones that members have concerns with, and also those that I have had the feedback from. The recommendations are on page 12. Which would need to be taken to council for ratification. So I'm happy to take any questions. Okay.
Councillor Garton, would you like to have a view?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am the representative on the Kent Downs AONB unit, and through my work with the AONB unit, it has been brought to my attention that in this report there are some very important I wouldn't say misinformation, but inaccuracy or items actually missing. When we're talking about the Kent Downs Advisory Group, or Steering Group as it was called in its later stages, this is correct that this group is actually disbanded. However, we're talking about 3 Kent Downs groups here, which is, first of all, the AONB unit, which the Council, according to this report, will continue to support. The Mid-Kent Downs Advisory Group or Steering Group, which I agree has been disbanded, but there's also the Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnership. And the funding, the £10,000 funding, is actually not to the Mid-Kent Downs Steering Advisory Group, but to the Countryside Partnership. And so therefore, I would like to explain a little bit about the history, how these 3 groups actually developed over time, and why it is important to continue the Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnership. In 2000, the Mid-Kent Downs Advisory Group, a community forum chaired by Maidstone Borough Council, recognised this need and campaigned for a countryside partnership to operate in the area. The Kent Downs AONB unit responded, and funding from Kent County Council, Maidstone Borough Council, the Railing Countryside Initiative and the Countryside Agency enabled a Mid-Kent Downs Countryside project to be established. This project is now an independently operating countryside partnership. Maidstone Borough Council continued to chair the Mid-Kent Downs Advisory, then Steering Group, until 2016, enabling communities to air their views on rural issues and landscape conservation. The Steering Group did not provide a lead for the partnership. The Mid-Kent Downs Partnership staff gave updates to this group. The Mid-Kent Downs Steering Group and the Countryside Partnership are separate, unrelated organisations. The Steering Group has now disbanded, as far as I can see. I had no contact with them. But the Countryside Partnership is still operating and has been seriously weakened by the withdrawal of funding by Maidstone Borough Council. At the moment, actually, the Kent Downs AONB unit is plugging this gap for the current financial year. However, I was informed by their leader that they will not be able to continue that in the future after 2018. I was then also informed that I had a meeting with Deanne Cunningham back in June, 21st of June, and she informed me that the cut of the funding to the partnership was actually a decision taken by officers, mainly from the planning department, but I tried to dig around various sources within MBC, and I could not really get any definite answers on that one. But if I may quickly summarise what Maidstone would be losing out by stopping the funding of the Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnership, the summary of the key facts for Maidstone Borough Council. The partnership delivers multiple projects throughout the Mid-Kent Downs area, which demonstrably implement the key MBC strategic priorities: providing a clean and safe environment, encouraging good health and well-being, and respecting the character of our borough. Maidstone Borough Council states that the Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnership is an important delivery partner on page 6 of the MBC Green and Blue Infrastructure Strategy, the June 2016 edition. With an average staffing of 1.5 full-time FTE employees, full-time employees, over the last 5 years, the partnership has delivered in an annual average of £78,700 against MBC's annual contribution of £10,000, so an investment return, a leverage of almost 8-to-1 per year. The partnership has established at least 12 significant community green space projects in Maidstone Borough with lasting positive impact on the local environment and health and well-being. Without the support of that partnership, many of these initiatives will cease. The partnership is developing projects worth further £450,000 to Maidstone Borough over the next 2 years to 2019 and more beyond. Obviously, these projects will not go ahead if the partnership is no longer supported. The partnership supports Maidstone Borough's statutory duties for both biodiversity and supporting the purposes of the AONB. Now, maybe you want to, if we can go back to agenda point 11, if you want to fill your task list a little bit for this committee, Nick Johansson from the Kent Downs AONB unit would be more than happy to talk to members of this committee to shed some more light behind it than what I could do.
Thank you. Garton, and thank you for your comments there. The officers beside me are saying it would not be an item that would need to come back to this committee. I'll let Angela.
I believe, because obviously the funding, discretionary funding, if it's with planning officers and they've made the decision for that funding to be removed, if it went back to if it was going to be referred to a committee to look at, it would be the Strategic Planning Sustainable Transportation, SPST committee. That's where it would go. It wouldn't come here. This committee is only looking at appointments to outside bodies, not funding or anything of that nature, so they wouldn't be involved, just to make that clear.
Councillor Garton.
Mr. Chairman, I've been sort of sent from pillar to post on these things, and I also spoke to the chair of the strategic committee, and basically it's not me, Gov, and tonight I hear the same thing. It's not us responsible for this. So could this committee make an official recommendation?
Councillor Ring,
it's just confirming that if we had £10,000, that'd be absolutely lovely, but we haven't. So I was going to say that I think we should recommend that it goes to the committee for them to make a decision on. Our bit, as far as I was concerned, sorry, Mr. Chairman, was when we started this, was to make it easier for our officers who are working on these outside bodies, which is costing money, time, and we don't need to. So that's what we're here for tonight, isn't it? To decide that, not money. So I'm ever so sorry. But someone's not telling you right.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ring. Councillor Borton, you signalled to speak.
Yeah, well, I think so. Moving on to the more general point, we're sort of here tonight to look at the specifics of the outside bodies we're all having. This bit of work has taken a long time and was started years ago, potentially. And I'm sure it's been an absolute nightmare for many, many officers of this council. So if we sort of delve into, it clearly has by the conversations we've all had on it, delving into the detail of Appendix A then, just a couple of things to start with. Firstly, the question, obviously, is there a community interest, which is a very vague, broad question. I think you can argue there's a community interest to every single one of these or none of these at all. So I personally, and I wasn't at the working group meeting in July because I couldn't go, take whether that's yes or no with a pinch of salt. So I think it's totally subjective and it depends on who you ask. The three columns of the table I'm most interested in are whether it's a strategic body or whether we've got a statutory requirement, whether the council provides funding, and whether there's a legal requirement or not. Because I personally think they are probably the three best criteria to judge whether this council should be involving itself in these outside bodies. And should outside body meet very clearly one of those three criteria, then it clearly should be something that this council should look at. So therefore, what I did in advance of the meeting was I went through and I looked at the outside bodies on here, which did not meet any of those three tests, if you want to call it there. And there are obviously, I think that in total, there's probably about 15 or 20 of them which do not. So, therefore, if this committee agrees to the conclusion that I've come with, that if you don't meet those three requirements, then your place as an outside body is in jeopardy, is it worth us stating that as a criteria now, and those that do not meet any of those three criteria be deleted tonight as outside bodies?
Actually, I think we should go through them, actually. That way, everybody, and we'll take it one at a time, any...
I just want to get clear then, Councillor Borton. You're saying you looked at the first three columns, and if there were no's in all of those, the first where it says, if is appointment strategic body or is there a statutory requirement? And then the next to the right. So if it went no, no, no in all of those, you're proposing remove said object? Yes? Okay, right. Fire away.
What I'm proposing at the moment is that I've basically put a little mark next to each of them, which is up for further discussion, but on the proviso that if it doesn't meet all three, then I think we've got to have a seriously good reason to keep it.
Thank you very much. I think we, the general consensus, obviously, here at this committee is that we do go through all of them, and we take the points that you've raised, and we'll discuss each one of them if it's needs to be. Thank you.
Oh, I'm going through them. Okay, crikey. So the first one that meets those three criteria is the Collis Millennium Green Trust on page 19, which is obviously offered to High Street Ward members first. There's obviously a further caveat I'd add to this, Mr. Chairman, if I may, which relates to those committees which have been noted that they're offered to a ward member first, or it is advised that the ward member be the representative on those committees. Because what I'm conscious that we don't want to do is they tend to fall into certain wards, depending geographically, for example. And what we don't want to do is, if a representative is elected as a member of a council for this particular ward, I'm conscious that, and I'm not talking about incumbency, I'm talking about future councillors down the line, we don't want it hanging around their neck that this committee insists that they be a representative of this particular outside body, because they might not want to do that and they might have been elected on a different mandate. I'm not saying that clearly doesn't apply to the incumbents who are on those outside bodies at all, but for future representatives of those communities down the line. So that's the caveat I'd add on those particular outside bodies that meet that, that it's proposed that the ward member is offered or is given that responsibility.
Yeah, I would say that's a sensible move. Councillor Vizard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Exactly what Councillor Bolton said is, I think, what was spoken about at the meeting, that it should be offered to the appropriate ward member, but if there was somebody with this expertise that was on the council, they should be the person that takes the slot. Or if they had a particular interest to that particular outside body, was the person. But primarily it should have gone to the ward councillor.
Yeah, I take that comment. Councillor Cox.
I think also should be under consideration is how much it affects our officers or whether it's a burden upon us financially, because some of these are done as a community involvement by whoever might be in them. I saw along here that we've got YMCA. Now, very unlike me, but I hope it's all right, I texted who I thought was one of those members who's on it, and has come back with a very good point. Any member of this council can apply to be on any outside body, but it's really looking at the involvement of what it costs us if it's outside body. Do we have to have involvement of officers if we're on it? Are we able to undertake this ourselves without any involvement of the borough? And indeed, I suspect there are a lot of members who are involved with things outside of the borough and do it because of their involvement in the community. I can see where Councillor Bolton's going with this, but I think it's also quite dangerous. If there is a sitting member in any of these outside bodies, I don't think we should be looking to remove them just as this committee goes, no, 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 they're off. Because I think the involvement is on a community basis for many of these appointments. This is our first one, and you've got Councillor Denise Joy is ongoing and probably has been in that committee position or has been offering her support for probably the whole term she's been in post. So I think we need to be careful. I would like to see, I agree with your no, 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 but I wonder if there's another position that we should go, is there a financial involvement? If that's what we're servicing to do here, and that is to look at where we can save any money and involvement of officers, if that's been done, then is there a thing saying, does it have a financial interest? Sorry, I haven't looked along.
It does say.
So it's the second.
If I may, on behalf of the working group, as they're not all here, when we discussed this, it was raised that if you looked at some of the ward ones, so for example, the Annington, Collis, those sort of appointments, the point was made by the councillors that actually it does not preclude ward members from being involved just because they're not appointed by the council. Because I think actually Councillor Joy was one of the ones who said when we started the working group last year, she gave the example of she's involved in the street passes, but she would still do that regardless. So it's that caveat, isn't it? I think that's what Councillor Bolton was getting at, if that's helpful.
Don't need to be the Maidstone Council representative, but they can do it in the spare time all they want.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody, any other comments on that one? Okay.
You're going to go through about whether you're going to get rid of it?
That's what we agreed. So the Collis Millennium Green Trust, maintaining the green open space in this area, do we keep it there or delete it? Now, I'm going to take a vote on that. Those for keeping it. For keeping it in there. Those for deleting it. Two. Just looking. So, are there any abstentions? Hang on, we're going to start again here. Okay, those for, I'm going to say those for deleting this one. Yes, deleting it. So we won't appoint to it. Those for deleting it. 2, 3, 4. 4. Those for not deleting it. Those for who were abstaining. 3. I'm going to abstain on that one.
You've got to take a no, because you've got casting vote, so you need to use your casting vote.
Yeah, but it's not for abstained, it's for again.
So on that vote, that one was deleted. Okay. Put the next one. We could be here all night, actually. But so.
Take Councillor Bolton through his list. So Councillor Bolton.
Councillor Bolton. Then
I'll go from my list. The next one on my list that meets the criteria I set out earlier is the Kent Community Rail Partnership.
Which one?
Kent Community Rail Partnership. The blue
right.
one. On page
I can't
20.
read these. Yep, there we are.
The one in,
I think
the one in blue on page 20.
Right, you've all had time to look at that one. Those for keeping it, can we vote on that? Those for keeping it in place? None. Those for deleting it? 7, I think. Those abstentions? 2. I'm abstaining. 3. I'm abstaining as well on that.
So we're deleting that one.
Yep. We've agreed to delete that one. Kent Community Rail Partnership. Right. Councillor Bolton, the other one.
The next one is the Kent Downs Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Joint Advisory Committee, which is 2 down from the Kent Community Rail Partnership on the table in front of us. Right. This is one that's offered to the North Downs Ward member first.
So, Kent Downs Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Joint Advisory Committee.
Well, no, you referred the other one.
You referred the funding for the
Countryside Partnership.
Yeah, the partnership.
Now, are we going to vote to keep this one?
I think.
Who's for keeping it?
No. Sorry, to clarify, councillors, the recommendation to SPST concerned the Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnership, not this, which is the body that sits underneath the Kent Downs AONB, I believe. Is that right?
But not seconded, not voted on.
Therefore, can I just raise a point of order on that then? In that case, in order to be on the committee which sits underneath this committee, would the Kent Downs AONB Joint Advisory Committee have to remain an outside body, or could you still sit on the committee that sits under it, even if this wasn't an outside body?
The Mid-Kent Downs Steering Group, the chair of that group, used to be automatically appointed to this group, to this advisory group. So we've no longer got the steering group, if we do delete that. But it's entirely up to you.
Right. Sorry, councillors, this gets more confusing. Because you've referred the Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnership to SPST, if they decided, for example, to fund that, yes, the funding should be put back in, you've then got an outside body with funding and you're not appointing to the group that sits above it. So it probably would be sensible. So I would either defer it or it's considered at the same time.
On this one. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just give you a quick briefing on the actual duties of the AONB unit and what they are doing for this council. Just in a few bullet points here. Maidstone Borough Council is a member of the Kent Downs Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, the AONB Joint Advisory Committee. The committee takes a lead on strategic and statutory matters concerning the AONB and oversees the statutory preparation and review of the AONB management plan. At our last meeting, the timetable for the latest statutory review was agreed. The review will require input from MBC officers and members, and ultimately it will need to be formally adopted by the Council. The statutory deadline for adoption is April 2019. So there's a statutory duty, and the AONB unit itself is a statutory group. In support of the review of the AONB is leading on an update of the landscape character assessment of the Kent Downs AONB. This is a helpful approach to describing the character and qualities of the landscape and supports the Council's functions in relation to the AONB, its countryside policies, and it's a helpful planning tool. Members and officers attended a workshop on the 10th along with various stakeholders and representatives from other local planning authorities, and updated the landscape character assessment will be available in the autumn. The AONB unit runs a series of projects, mainly externally funded, which help to meet the vision, aims and policies of the management plan. Currently, projects which are benefiting Maidstone Borough include the management of Boxley Warren, the management of the North Downs Way National Trail, support and management for historic community-owned orchards in the Maidstone area, management support for a variety of community landscape projects. At a wider scale, the unit is developing a bid in the region of £200,000 from the National Grid Landscape Enhancement Initiative to improve the landscape corridor in the Boxley-Brethurst area. And they are also scoping the opportunities for strategic level landscape enhancement projects in the Hollingbourne Vale area. They are hopeful that this will lead to a substantial bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund for a landscape partnership scheme. The unit and Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnership are also working closely with the Old Chalk New Downs HLF project, which has just commenced and operates in parts of the AONB.
Excuse me, Councillor Garton. I think you've had enough. I think
I think the important point that you've made is that this, in fact, is a statutory body, and so there's possibly an error in the list, in which case it doesn't meet Councillor Borton's no test. And on that basis, it shouldn't be up for deletion.
Right. The officers just... well, would you like to just read that?
As a part of the feedback that I received on the North Kent Downs ONOB advisory group, the leader has said that should this not actually be offered out to the other wards within the North Kent Downs, i.e. not just the North Kent Downs ward, North Downs ward, so i.e. Boxley, Thurnham, Detlin, Stockbury, etc. So, rather than our recommendation here that it's just offered out to the North Kent Downs, we offer it out.
Councillor Ring, you signal first.
No, if that's not. Oh, yeah, it's on. Yeah, sorry. I think what we're trying to get at here is everything is okay. One, I think our colleague who's come forward has got mixed up about the money, and I hope that we've explained that properly. But should we be supplying administration to this group? Surely they should be finding that themselves. That's all I'm asking. Because I don't think that we should.
Caroline,
right.
can you come in on
Okay.
that? Yep.
Sorry.
Councillor Vizard.
Thank you, Chairman. I think probably the decision that was made earlier was if we refer it back to SST, the planning. Yeah, that's the lot. If they are going to fund it, yes, it does fall into the criteria. But I think where we are at the present time, we should just defer this item until we get a response back from the other group. And also, if it does come back, we should include the other ward members as a point one of those. But at this stage, we should just defer it back.
Councillor Cox.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm really a bit. I know I've just been parachuted in for the evening. This piece of work we've heard has been taken an awful long time to come back to your committee to make a decision on. We're making decisions in 2 or 3 minutes about whether to strip something from our outside bodies. And I think that is mighty dangerous. We have recommendations here, and I'm afraid, Councillor Bolton, you're just going, they've gone no, 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 but on the left hand it says it is to be retained, and we just wiped it off. And I understand that is within the remit of this committee, but if any member was reading these papers, they would have seen that the things that are on here is recommended for retention, and now they've gone, and they haven't had a chance to actually come back and say, we need to be represented on this committee. We have one member that is here, but I do think if we're going to do that, would it be prudent to say, we'd like to amend this document with a recommendation to look very, very carefully at whether we should have it, based on your recommendation of no, no, no. Therefore, we're saying it should come off. That should then go back out to members who may or may not be involved, so they can have a chance to come back to this. Because I think we could get a rather large call-in if we do this. And I do think it's a problem. I'd like to hear what people think.
Councillor Bolton.
We had exactly this last year. Exactly this, and I was chair at the time, and I said, look, we'll do it all again. Basically, we'll do it more thoroughly because we had. I can almost remember the meeting like it was yesterday, when we basically made this decision. And ultimately, it comes down to a decision. If I'm a member and I'm on an outside body, and I see the Democracy Committee papers which consider the future of that outside body, I do exactly what Councillor Garson has done and turn up tonight and make it clear. This committee has got to make a decision. It's been going on so long, as I said. Tonight is the time to make the decision, otherwise we go round in the circle for the 3rd time. Yes, but this committee, the whole purpose of this committee is to ultimately make a decision. We don't have to go through recommendations. Even if the recommendation is to keep it in and move it under the control of a committee, what I'm proposing, under the criteria that I set out earlier, is we do something different. Otherwise, we are wasting officers' time yet again on this report. This will be the 2nd time, in effect, this committee has chucked out the report that's come in front of us, and this will have gone on for a ridiculously long period of time. So unless we make a decision tonight, I cannot see how it benefits anyone this going on any longer.
Well, thank you. I think the one we've got here in front of us now is the Kent Downs AONB Joint Advisory Committee. Would anybody like to make a suggestion as where we go with this? Do we approve it?
As Mr. Harris said earlier, that there might be an error in the report that it is a strategic body. It therefore does not meet the criteria that I set out earlier, and therefore this should be deferred for further investigations as to the actual make-up of that committee and its relationship with the other committee that's been that we spoke about earlier.
So, are members happy with that suggestion? Okay, well, that's what we do with it then. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, when exactly what Thornton's been saying about the recommendation that's been put forward is to put them back to the committees to appoint. The only 5 that we were talking about taking out are on the back, not to go through the complete list. And this one has been deferred, the bottom one, because of, for whatever reason. So we're only actually talking about taking 4 out.
I think, by way of clarification, if we go through the list and you vote on deletion or retention, and then you subsequently go for the recommendation as it has been amended by those deletions, and then someone proposes and seconds that recommendation that's been amended, then you will have achieved what you set out to achieve.
Absolutely, that's what I'm getting. We'll have an amended recommendation, and some outside bodies will have changed categories, and the ones we're talking about are those that meet the tests that I set out earlier. So the next one is halfway down page 21, which meets the 3 tests, or the 3 no's, if we're going to call them that, which is the Maidstone Area Arts Partnership. However, as the Mayor is the honorary president, should the statutory body column actually say yes?
So if you look across, so I think the Mayor does support it, and from what I've heard from councillors, it's well supported by the Mayor. However, the other spaces are vacant. So is it that actually we continue with the appointment of Mayor, but we drop the other places on it as a suggestion?
Yeah, if we're just talking about the other 2 places and the Mayor's position is whether it's an outside body or not, the Mayor will always be president, and we're just talking about the other 2 positions, then that clearly meets the tests. My query was basically, does the Mayor make it a statutory body, which the answer is no, so we carry on and we vote on it as before.
Councillor Cox.
Can I just ask, if it says there are 2 appointees, is that costing the borough anything? Just because they're not taken up. I think we've had a lot of new members who haven't been made aware by any of their, if we have them, mentors within existing councillors, and say that it's really a very good idea to get involved with some things locally. You can see what's happening, you can keep in touch with your community. And if they're on here, this is an item that we have that is recommended to keep. A current sitting Mayor is the honorary president. And yes, there are 2 appointees annually which are currently vacant, but I think we ought to be very careful.
I think part of the suggestion of referring it to HCL to make the appointment is that it probably encourage more appointments, because you'll be referring it to members who are already interested. And that's why when we're saying if it's down to keep, it's going to be assigned to the committee to make sure we do get the appointments. And I think it's fair to say we haven't advertised these vacancies because this review has been going on for so long. Some of these vacancies have just expired and not been replaced because of the ongoing review. So, yeah, I think that's a fair point in terms of just because it's vacant doesn't mean people aren't interested. But it's still your decision.
From my own perspective, I've actually sat on this, and it does do a lot of background stuff that they probably don't get credit for. They do indeed, yeah. So I would suggest, I'd like to recommend we keep it myself, but you're the committee, you make the decision. We'll take a vote on it. Who's for keeping it? 2, 3, 4. Those against? 1, 2, 3. Abstentions? 1. 2.
Says kept. You keep it. It's kept.
It's retained.
The next one, Mr. Chairman, sorry, is the Maidstone
all right,
Cycling
Councillor
Forum,
Borden.
directly underneath it.
Directly. Councillor Lewins.
Thank you, Chair. The Maidstone Cycling Forum, I think, has only just got off the ground, so I think it would be unfair to, even though it meets part of the criteria, it's still a new thing. So I think it would be unfair to delete this one.
I would tend to agree with that, because the encouragement is to. We've all got to get on our bikes, as they say. So can I take a vote on that one? Those for keeping it. Those against keeping it. 2, 3, 4, 5. So. Yeah. Councillor Vizard, were you for keeping it or deleting it? For keeping it. Right, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to take the vote again?
Can we take the vote again so it's clear? Those for keeping that in. Those for deleting it. 4. Oops, the next one on your list, Councillor
Well,
Bond.
the next one on my list, Councillor Cox made a good point earlier about if we're trying to achieve cost savings from it, we should look at those committees, those outside bodies, which we currently provide funding to. So, if you're going to look at those committees which don't meet the criteria, but the council does provide funding to, then Maidstone Mediation directly below would meet that criteria. Although it's not 3 no's, there is a yes. There's 10,000 in the middle column. So if we were to delete that, then we would be achieving a saving of £10,000 to the council. Is that correct or is that incorrect?
Really, no. This committee doesn't decide the funding. So actually, that one actually sits with Communities, Housing and Environment, and they've got their own review looking at grants to outside bodies and their own. So no, by taking out the appointment, you don't take away the money, you just take away someone looking at it.
So the next one that does over on the next page, another one. Maidstone Mind, we don't actually have an answer on page 22 at the top, whether it's a strategic body or a statutory requirement or not. So I'm not quite sure whether that meets criteria or not. If the answer's no, then it would meet the criteria and obviously be one for discussed. If the answer's yes, then we move on.
Councillor Ring.
I'd just like to ask a question here. I know Councillor Grigg-Sue is on Maidstone Mine and she works very, very hard for this committee. And what we haven't pointed out here, if we go to the committees and they recommend the person that's going to be, does that mean that it would be the person, would it be the people from the committee or would it be from any councillor? Because I'm a bit confused on that because we'll end up with the same problems as we got basically now. No, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask that take a vote on that one? On Maidstone Mind?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Is the answer to the blank box yes or no?
I think we should defer that one for discussion.
The next one is Maidstone Sea Cadets. May I just at this point explain why it meets, I think it meets criteria, obviously because it answers no to all the questions. That's the obvious answer. But I guess that this reduced rental lease could carry on whether it's an outside body or not.